Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast. Today, we're taking a time machine back to 1880 to learn about one of the earliest forms of photography, the wet plate. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast, a weekly podcast for those who believe that moments matter most and that a beautiful photo is more than just a sum of its settings. A show for those who want to do more with the gear they have to take better photos today. And now, your host, Raymond Hatfield.
Welcome back to this episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. I am your host, Raymond Hatfield, and as always, I am excited to be here. I'm happy to be here. I gotta say, I'm just one of the luckiest people in the world to be able to do what it is that I do, to be able to talk to such incredible photographers, and what gets me most excited is to then be able to share that information with you, because what good is a conversation if nobody else can benefit from it? So hopefully the ideas that we share on this podcast, you can then take and use in your own photography, whether you're just shooting as a hobby, as a creative outlet for recreation, or even if you use it for a business. And speaking of which, I know that there's a lot of new listeners this week, maybe not new listeners, but new premium listeners to the podcast. So to all of you, I just wanted to say welcome to your first premium episode of the podcast. But back to this is a massive week. A lot really interesting in this episode for you. We check out something that is not traditionally talked about. It's not even traditionally practiced anymore. There's a very few number of photographers who still do this type of photography, and I'm so excited to share this information with you, the listeners. But first, I want to give a massive thank you to September 4th, 2001, not the date, the username, for leaving the podcast a 5-star iTunes review. They said, "This podcast is definitely not just for beginners. Raymond has such great and relevant content across the board, wherever you are in your photography journey. The guests are fantastic, and it is just photographers sharing info with other photographers. Us. I love listening to this podcast every week." September 4th, I'm not sure who you are, but from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for listening and for your support. You know, leaving the podcast a review is such a great way to show your support for the show. Super quick, super easy to do. If you're in the podcast app on an iPhone right now, just click on the image, so the show, scroll all the way to the bottom of the episode list, and then you'll see the option to rate the show right there. And it lets me know that I'm not just a man in the middle of Indiana whose kids are looking at him through the window, wondering who in the world Dad is talking to, with nobody else in the room right now. So if you would consider leaving the podcast a review, I can show them, I don't know, that, your review, and let them know that Dad is not crazy. So, okay. A little backstory before we get into this episode. I want to give you some context about what it is that we're going to be talking about. So before digital photography, there was film, which reigned supreme for almost 100 years, right? But before film, photography was kind of a wild west, you could say. And one popular type of photography back in the late 1800s was a process called wet plate, where, honestly, I think I might have been enjoying the interview so much that I may have failed to ask some clarifying questions that would help you, like basic brand new photographers, better understand what wet plate is. So I'm sorry about that. But essentially what you do is you take a polished piece of glass, pour some chemicals on it, and then you make that glass photosensitive. Now that's obviously a very, dumbed down version of how this works. But then you have to immediately develop that plate of glass before the wet chemicals dry. Now, I probably did, again, a terrible job of explaining that. So, in the show notes of this episode, today's guest, Shane, has a 3-minute video that shares his entire wet plate process, obviously in video form. And it's really interesting to check out, and it really makes you take really makes you understand the amount of work that goes into something like this. So I hope that gives you a mental image in your head of how this whole thing works. And again, if you want to see it for yourself, guess what? Shane was actually the subject of a film doc titled Balkowitsch, which is his last name. And you can find that on Amazon Prime. Really interesting look at how the whole process works. To rent it, it's $6, which I think is well worth it because Again, I mean, it really just shows you how intricate photography was and how, delicate and how much work and how labor intensive it was just to take a single photo. So I think that it is so well worth it that I want you to watch it. And then if this whole thing sounds interesting to you, I want you to stick around for after the interview. I'm going to share with you how I'm going to pay for your rental. All right. So anyway, with that, let's go ahead and get on into this interview with Shane Balkowitsch. Prior to shooting wet plate photography, you've said that you've never owned a digital camera, but you've had many creative endeavors, I guess, or pursuits. So how were you introduced to wet plate photography, and why do you think it stuck with you right away?
I get asked that question a lot. I feel that there's something visual that I needed. I've always felt like I was a visual kind of person. So I never owned a camera. Obviously I had a camera on my phone and stuff like that, but I never had an interest in photography whatsoever. And I saw an image online. I asked what it was. The photographer told me what it was. And I just fell down this rabbit hole with this very archaic, process that dates back to, the 1850s.
So that was obviously like the Cliff Notes version right there. When you say that you've really never been interested in photography, I find that there's some sort of disconnect between that and kind of where you're at today, spending so much time so deep into the wet plate process. So I kind of want to know, is it more of the technical side of wet plate that gets you excited? What is it about specifically wet plate that gets you excited more so than maybe digital photography ever did?
Well, I think wet plate isn't anything about convenience. So, the technical side, I did not know what it was going to take to make a wet plate. I guess at first I didn't realize that I would have had to have a darkroom of some sort. That's how naive I was. I didn't know what an f-stop was. I knew nothing about lenses. I knew nothing about cameras. Obviously I didn't know anything about large format cameras. I had no point of reference. So for me, chasing this and learning from the ground up, just stumbling my way through it, it just seemed kind of natural. It didn't seem like an inconvenience. Like if I would have known digital photography or even film photography, you would say, oh, well, gosh, this is so much more difficult or something like that. I never knew these more recent processes. And so the difficulty was never really there. The difficulty was trying to figure out how to get an image. Like that's all I cared about. There was no, I can be honest with you, I had no creative ideas at all. It was just about getting an image. I wanted to be able to point this lens and camera at something and be able to transfer it into pure silver on glass. And it was that goal or that end game that I just one step in front of the next, one step in front of the next. So it's not about convenience for me. It's not about difficulty for me. I still have difficulties in the process. People ask me, when do I think I'm going to master this process? And I always, for the last 8 years, I've had the same answer 30 years from now. So it gives you an idea of, you never really become, perfect at it. You just continue to chase it.
I find it crazy that after looking at obviously the process of wet plate, looking at some of your photos, some people have the audacity to ask you, when are you going to master this? As if your photos are just technically crazy, because whatever they're thinking is, I don't know, I think so far removed from probably what goes into wet plate. So that's just my little thing there to say that I think that your work is great, I guess. So I didn't work out that whole.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And maybe that answer also, Raymond, goes back to people have called me a master. Like they've called me, they've said he's a master of wet plate in interviews and online and stuff. And I always go, whoa, hold on a moment. Let's not go there quite yet. Give me another 30 years. So maybe my answer was more to that notion of someone calling me a master, because I just don't, I think I know in my heart, I know there's a lot more to learn, and that I know that I can improve much more. I know it's going to be smaller baby steps than these larger leaps that I took when I first started taken my portraits, but online, if you look on my website, you can go back there's a little link that shows every year my images. So you can go back to 2012 and I keep them out there for this specific reason. And usually why I keep them out there is because when I have wet plate brothers or sisters, and there's only about, I should tell your listeners, there's probably only about 1,000 of us in the world that do this process. But when I have someone coming on, and I'm always trying to assist other people trying, if they want to take this on, they'll always say, well, look at your images versus my images, that kind of thing. And I said, hold on a moment, click on this link, and I'll send them that link. And then they get to see, because all they know about me is my recent work. And then I show them my first work, my very, very amateur work. And then it gives them a little bit of like, well, wow, look at Shane, this is how far Shane's come in 8 years. If I want to do this, I can do the same thing. And understand, all these people that usually take it on the wet plate process are photographers, usually professional photographers. Not many people just start from, this is their only process. So they have the tools and the knowledge of light and the use of light and composition and all these things. These are things I didn't have any of that. I knew nothing of any of that.
So really excited to dive specifically into that idea right there. But I think maybe I got a little bit ahead of myself. Maybe before we get any further, can you explain to me, as if I've never heard of the thing before, could you explain what wet plate photography is?
Yes, of course. In about 1848, Frederick Scott Archer from Europe, he decided that he was going to figure out this new way of making photographs. So the Daguerreotype, to give your listeners a little bit of history, the Daguerreotype was the previous process, about a decade before wet plate process. They were polishing, daguerreotypes were polishing pieces of copper and using mercury and heating it up, and they're getting heavy metal poisoning. And there's some very beautiful images came out of the daguerreotype era. But Archer wanted to figure out a better way, or a more convenient way, a safer way to make images. And so what he did is he figured out there was, it's called wet plate collodion photography. So collodion is the key term there. So collodion had a medical application. If you were a doctor or on the plains or something like that, and someone cut their arm or something, or someone got, a sword cut or something like that. As a doctor, you would have a bottled ether with you. This is in the Victorian era, understand. This is 1840s, 1850s. You'd have a bottle of ether with you to put people to sleep if you had to extract a tooth or cut off an arm or whatever the reason it would be. But that was your way of making people unconscious. You would take your bottle of ether, you go to your gunsmith who would have gun wadding, which is cellulose, which is the white wadding that they used to stuff down the barrels of guns. You would put that cellulose in a bottle of ether, and you would make collodion. I would then go to your arm where you have this slash or this wound, and I pour that mixture onto your wound, and I would seal it shut, stopping the bleeding. So it was like this liquid bandage of the Victorian era. And Frederick Scott Archer knew about this kind of like glue substance. And what he did, the coin flipped, and how he applied it to photography, he figured out, he knew that there was an affinity between bromide salts and silver molecules. And he knew that he could get silver out of silver nitrate baths. It's called salted collodion. He added a certain percentage of bromide into the collodion. I pour the salted collodion onto, and you asked for this, Raymond, so I'm giving you a long explanation.
I love it. Keep going.
If I'm going too far. So I got my bottle of salted collodion, I pour it onto the plate. I then, it's called wet plate for a reason. If the plate dries, and this is one of those inconveniences, again, we were talking about earlier, the thing, why people probably got away from this. If the plate dries, you lose the image. So you can't go and have a sandwich. You can't go, once you pour that plate, you're making an image right there, and you have to have them available to you right there. So I pour the collodion onto the glass plate. I immerse that plate into a bath of 10% silver nitrate. The silver molecules jump out of the silver nitrate. They attach to the bromide that's in the collodion, and I make a photosensitive plate. I then take that photosensitive plate, expose it in my camera. I bring it back, and before it dries, I have to develop it. I gotta rinse it, I gotta fix it, I gotta rinse it, and then it goes on the drying rack. So there's this process that you just have to follow, and it has to be done in a relatively short amount of time. Last week, I went down to Dignity in South Dakota and captured the Native American statue down there, and it was 90 degrees out, and there was a wind, and these plates and this plate of ether and stuff. I was just struggling because I was in bright daylight, and it was just very difficult to in that kind of environment to to make a wet plate. So and then once you're dry, so the plate, once it's dry, the image is made out of pure silver. And what's beautiful about pure silver, there's two things about this process that I think your listeners need to know about. First is the longevity or the archivability of a wet plate. An image made out of silver will be here 1,000 years from now unbroken. So you can't say that for pigments and dyes and inks and any other kind of thing we create with. They all fail over time. We know that. We can look at a painting that's 300 years old and we can say, oh, look, it's failing. A silver image does not fail. So we have the archivability of the wet plate, and then we have the resolution of the wet plate. And the resolution of a wet plate is at the molecular level. So I'm writing in molecules of silver.
Rather than pixels.
Do you know how many molecules? Rather than pixels. Do you know how many molecules of silver I have to stack on top of each other to visualize it with the human eye?
I couldn't imagine.
2 billion.
2 billion.
Okay, so you can take my wet plate, any one of my dried plates at the end of this process, and you can take it to any university and ask for their highest resolution microscope. And you can put my wet plate under that microscope and you can't get to the pixel of grain that makes up that image.
Wow, that's incredible.
You need an electron microscope. I've seen images on an electron microscope to get down to the pixels of grain that make up that image. So these are the most high resolution images man has ever made. And we abandoned this process in the mid 1880s for something simpler and faster and cheaper and more convenient.
And more convenient. Yeah.
It wasn't a good enough reason.
No,
it wasn't a good enough reason.
That's funny. It's not a good enough reason, I think, for you, but I wonder how far we would advance in photography if we would not have abandoned it. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not trying to, it's just an interesting, I guess, thought process there, which is obviously like there's things that are far superior. And this even happens today. There are things that come out that are far superior, but for some reason, either convenience or nowadays maybe marketing, we choose the lesser of the option because it's convenient. So I'm glad that you decided to stick with this and continue on, because you were kind enough to send me your book here, which I have looked through, and I've thought to myself, looking at some of the photos, I wish that I could see a higher resolution version of some of these images, because even printed, is this what size of a book is this? It's very large.
Like 11 by 14 or something like that. I'm not sure the exact size, but I have to understand that I'm taking a plate that has infinite resolution, or I can't use the word infinite, but it's very, very high resolution. Okay. And I'm putting it on a scanner bed and I'm trying to shove it into a 1200 DPI. It doesn't want to go there. One of the struggles that wet plate photographers have always had in the modern day is to replicate their work. And we just struggle. I mean, you'll see, we have no way, because if you came in and these plates on behind me here, as I'm talking, if you were in here and I could show it and I could hand you an analog photograph on glass, on a heavy piece of black glass that is made out of pure silver, you're just, anyone who walks in, the first thing that they say, if they know my work, they say, oh gosh, what we see online is not this. This is totally different. And I always say, yeah, it's not my work. And I explain that to the college students when they come out from the university and the junior college. They'll see prints or, maybe in my darkroom or whatever of my work, and I'll say that's not my work. And they get confused. And I said, well, that's not my work because that's on paper and that's a scan and that's not my work. My work exists on black glass and made out of pure silver. It's not black glass made of pure silver. It's a very bad, and I'm the first one to be honest about it. It's a very bad representation of my work. And that's just the truth. But that's not unique to me as a wet plate artist. That's unique to all wet plate artists. It's just the struggle. Everyone, and I've had a bunch of friends that do books, wet plate books of their work, and it's always we're just not happy with it. We're just not happy with it because we're just seeing the real work, and then we're trying to use some kind of technology to represent these plates, and it's a false representation. But we have to share it. I mean, the only reason people know about my work and stuff, and the only way I can share it is online and stuff. And so I have to do a scan of it. Yeah. The scan sucks. It's a reality.
It's funny. I feel like I kind of feel the opposite at times shooting digital, is that, we have such high resolution screens and sometimes it doesn't feel like enough. Like you can never get enough sharpness. But then when you go to print a photo, you realize, oh, there's more resolution on my computer screen than there is in this print, and suddenly this print looks fantastic. So
Right.
it's almost the exact opposite there, which is really something interesting to think about. To think about.
It's
I'm interested.
counterintuitive a little.
Yes, yeah. I'm interested to learn a little bit more in your learning process uh, as how you got into wet plate, because I'm assuming that there's really not as many instructional YouTube videos or books on how to shoot wet plate probably still in circulation. So tell me about how you learned how to shoot wet plate photography.
Well, once the decision, and I think I made that decision the first day I saw my first wet plate online. And again, I didn't see an original wet plate. It's not like I ran into an amber type, which is what these are called if they're on glass, and they're called tin type. So your listeners, I should also give them that little tidbit of information. It's a tin type if it's shot on tin or metal. It's an amber type if it's shot on glass. Amber type means eternal impression. But it's the same process, and people think they're different, and they are the same process. So I decided right away, and so I got online, obviously, as we all would. That's how I started doing some research, and I found a gentleman in upstate New York called John Coffer, who wrote a manual on how to make wet plates, and him and I are friends to this day. I've never met him. He sends me some of his work and sends me these letters. He doesn't even, he's in a house with one light bulb. He doesn't have a computer. He doesn't have a telephone. And he writes his manual. It's called the John Coffer's Doer's Guide. So I sent him, I think it was $75 at the time, to the PO box. A couple weeks later, this manual, this handwritten, hand-typed manual, came to my house, and I just sat there with a highlighter and just started reading, trying to understand. Okay, this is what I got to do first. Okay, that's step one. Oh, that's step two. Oh, I got to do that before that. But I had no point of reference. Like, I didn't even know, even about developing like film or anything. So I didn't know, okay, so you shoot the film and then you got to develop it. I didn't understand any of that. So it was John Coffer's manual. And then, you can find people on YouTube and stuff like that. And then I was on Facebook, and then I found some groups out there, and I have my own group now, Friends of Frederick Scott Archer on Facebook. So if anyone's interested, they can join that group. And we're just a bunch of guys and ladies trying to continue to practice what he had started so many years ago. So it was a bunch of learning. And then when you get started, and once you start that first day on October 4th, 2012, when I attempted my first wet plate, that's when you have all the questions. You know what I mean? Like, that's when you can read all you want. And I read, it was about 45 days. I had to have my camera made for me by Star Camera Company, my 5x7 wood camera with the bellows. I had to find a lens. So I mean, you could read all you want, but when you start practicing, that's when the real questions. And then you have people that are kind enough. Andreas Ray in Germany is my only wet plate mentor. Never met him as well, but I consider him my mentor. And I kick over and so this is what happened, or I'm getting this. What do I do? And he's always been there for me. So you just find someone else, and that's why I feel like starting Friends of Frederick Scott Archer and helping other people and showing them my previous images and stuff like that. Always trying to help someone if they're interested. I'm here to help them because people help me. So you got this handwritten manual in the mail. Is that right? This guy, you said John Coffer wrote. It's a handwritten manual. Yeah, I would recommend if your listeners want to get this manual, he has the handwritten one, which is in cursive, which I've seen pages from it, which is kind of difficult, and he'll admit that it's kind of difficult to follow. But then someone went and took his handwritten manual and typed it out with a typewriter.
Oh, thank goodness!
And that way. So, but John Coffer, I want to say in the 90s, he had traveled across the United States or some states with oxen and wagon taking wet plates. So he's
wow.
Brilliant. And he's got a yearly, people will pay homage to him and go to his Camp Tim Type, it's called. Every year he has, and I think it's going on right now, or it did last weekend, and people from all over the United States and all over the world will fly in and go to his little farm and camp out in his field and learn the process and spend time, and I'm going to use this word properly, with the master.
He's the master. That's good to know.
Yes.
I can't wait until you release your handwritten manuscript. That'll be the day. That's how you'll know when you become the master. So, as you said, though, you go from reading all this knowledge, and I'm right there with you. I can read all day, feel like I learned something, and then the second that I pick it up, I feel like I have no idea what's going on. So, you read everything that you could. You said 45 days. You went to go take that first wet plate. Walk me through some of the things that you immediately realized that you were struggling with.
Well, people will come in, and I always demonstrate. So if you came in as a complete stranger, if you came in as a sitter, and I was going to take your portrait on any given day, and I've made about 3,000. I can tell you exactly. Don't need to walk away. My next plate on Friday will be 3,598. I made 3,597 wet plates in the last nearly 8 years. I always demonstrate, so everyone comes into the darkroom, I show them the pour. I think that was the difficult part, is that you've got this liquid and you're pouring it onto a glass plate, and you're trying to keep that on the plate. You have to coat it evenly. Then you got to capture it back in the bottle because you don't want to lose all your chemicals. So I think that hands-on, and then there's a lot of it where you can't, like, I couldn't tell you, Raymond, okay, you develop for 18 seconds. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if I could tell you that as a newcomer, that would be brilliant, right? I'd say you just pour on the developer and you go 18 seconds and you got what you got, and that's always going to work. That's not how it works. So it was a lot of stumbling around, is how long is my exposure going to be? How fast is my lens? How long am I going to develop for? These things, and there's that marriage between the exposure time and the development time. You always want to get that exposure right, which I didn't understand that at first, right? I was just taking the lens cap off. Okay, this time I'll count to 4, or this time I'll count to 8. And then you look at it and like, well, that didn't work. Okay, so 8 isn't right. So is 6 right, or is 7 right, or is 12 right, or is 30 right? How long? So I usually, in my natural light studio, I have a 10-second exposure. So my iPhone, I think, my aperture is open for about 1/60th of a second, I think I read somewhere. So it's about 600 times longer to take a wet plate in the process than it is with a digital camera. So a romantic thought that these aren't snapshots per se, with the quotes. These are 10-second movies of my sitters. So there's heartbeats. I've said this before. There's heartbeats in the plate. There's a couple shallow breaths. There may be a blink. And what really is romantic is there's a thought. So my camera is capturing the thought during that 10 seconds. And you only get those romantic ideas when you have these longer exposures. So I have no interest. I have a 5,000 watt Balkowitsch unit from about 30 years ago, a flash unit, and I can get, boom, instant exposures. And I've done it 3 times maybe. And I quickly just put my Balkowitsch unit in the back room, and I've never used it since because I can't get to my work. So the split second exposures, it's not where I want to live. So I could probably get my exposure times down from 10 seconds to maybe 6 or 8, or depending. I have no interest. I want to be at 10 seconds. That's my sweet spot for me as an artist.
Talk to me more about that. That's a really interesting idea that I don't think I've ever heard anybody say before. I don't think I've ever heard anybody explain it like that. Talk to me more about having a longer exposure, and I guess the romance of it all. Is it all of it coming together? Is it that there's more feeling in the images that you produce? Why would you, now this is obviously just devil's advocate, why would you not want to have the shorter exposure?
I mean, and it's obvious to me, why would I not, right? I mean, it seems like you would, right? You would go to the faster, so wouldn't it make sense? The sitter doesn't have to, I have a head brace here from the Victorian era that I got to hold these people in place so they sit still. If you came in for a portrait, Raymond, it would take me about an hour. So on a Friday afternoon, I create on my Fridays, I'm in here for 8 hours, and I'll make maybe 3, 4, 5 plates at most. So at the end of 8 hours, so if I was going to take a serious portrait of you, it's going to take me an hour to compose that, talk through it. I coach you a little bit, and there's that rapport and that relationship between you and me that is made over that one exposure. Do you know what I mean? Like if I could get my iPhone out and I'll capture 1,000 images in that same amount of time. But there's something about, we're going to go for that one portrait, Raymond, and this is what we got to do to get it. And there's something romantic about that. And I've said this before. I mean, when was the last time you took a photograph of someone? And I'm going to say that to, and someone, a complete stranger, broke out into tears in front of you. Like, when was the last time you, on your iPhone, if you took a picture of someone, a portrait of someone, and you showed it to the person and they started crying?
Never.
I have people cry in my studio every month. I mean, I have a box of tissues in my darkroom for people that cry. And so I don't know. So I'm not saying that, I don't attribute that to my skill level. Okay. I attribute that completely to the process and what I'm trying to do here. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not that I make the most beautiful portraits that people break down in tears. That's not what I'm saying. I'm seeing this experience. And if they have, and it's not for everyone, but if these people that come in, my sitters, and they have the trust, and then they have an appreciation for history and what this plate represents, that this plate is the most high resolution image ever taken of you in your life and will ever be taken of you. That this plate, this image will outlast every other photograph ever taken of you in your life. This image will be the image that will be here 300 years from now, if someone cares for it. And with that history, and then, I explained to you earlier that I explained the process, and I show them the process, all the work that it takes to get that one image. And the response sometimes it's laughter, sometimes it's tears. I mean, when you have when you have a complete stranger break down in tears in your darkroom, there's something going on there. And how can you not just, like, you know what I mean? I can never take that for granted.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've never, as I said, I've never had that happen. Obviously, with a cell phone photo, I don't know if that happens from weddings, but I would imagine.
Yeah. Of course, yes. I mean, obviously, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's that immediate thing. It's like when the image comes up in the fixer, tears come to the face, and and I get choked up myself sometimes, and I've been doing this for 8 years now. I mean, and I will sometimes I will get choked up, and I'm explaining that. I think there's something about the human condition. I think there's something about us as humans that we are romantic about thinking about leaving things about our lives behind after we're gone. As an oncology nurse, I mean, I know I have an appreciation for that, that I know that I'm not going to be here forever. I'm always thinking about, okay, I've got to put these in acid-free sleeves. And, my will says that all my work is going to the Historical Society of North Dakota with my other work that's up there. I'm always thinking about if Shane's done today, this is my last day, what am I leaving behind? And I hope it's not, a vanity thing. I hope it's more of a, you know what I mean? Like some proof. Why was I here in the first place? Well, this is why Shane was here. He was here to document these people. I mean, if that's enough of a reason for me to be, to do what I'm doing, all the that I do, and all this time that I've spent, and hopefully all the time that I spend in the coming decades. I'm 51 now, so hopefully I can do this for another 25 years or something like that. So, I mean, that's my goal. I built the studio here at my house in my backyard because I have this vision of me walking down the hill with a cane or something, coming in on that Friday to make that last portrait. And, I don't know why these thoughts come into my mind. And some people may think it's corny, and that's fine if it's not for you, but that's not how I see these things. I see these things as a very special document of the human that I'm capturing. I'm capturing 10 seconds of your life, and you can never get it back. And I've dropped plates. Like Raymond comes in, we make this plate. Raymond likes the plate very much. You just, I love that portrait you did. Maybe you don't even like it, but then I drop it. I break it. And then I still got Raymond in my studio. I can still sit. The camera hasn't moved. The head brace is still there. The same chair. I can get back to that. I can sit Raymond back in that chair and try to capture that moment again. I can never get to it. I've tried. I can never get back to Raymond 19 minutes ago.
That is a lot of pressure, obviously, that gets put on you to be able to capture something and then obviously take care of it immediately afterwards. I wanted to talk about now, just in the past, almost 8 years now, you have gone from not owning a digital camera to now photographing some pretty notable figures. including which I saw in the documentary, 5-time heavyweight champion of the world, Evander Holyfield, and then recently Greta Thunberg. Now, these are people who may have never even heard of the wet plate process. They don't understand why a photo may take a considerable amount of time to capture. I can tell that you're passionate about this, but how do you clue them in on what you're about to do? How do you explain that process to them?
Well, first of all, the only reason I get Evander Holyfield and like Deb Haaland, of one of the first Native American congresswomen in the United States, I just spoke with her last week again. So these friendships continue on. Evander Holyfield, Virgil Hill, that plate of Evander Holyfield is at the Smithsonian Institute in their portrait gallery, the only portrait they have of Evander Holyfield. Virgil Hill was a North Dakota boxer, Olympian boxer, so probably our most famous pugilist from North Dakota, and he was in the same room as Evander Holyfield at the Olympics, or they were in the same camp or whatever. Virgil came out, and before Virgil said, I can spend an hour with you, Virgil spent like nearly 4 hours with me, showed me how to wrap my hands, and by the time Virgil left, he said to me, I'm gonna get the champ out here. And I said, what are you talking about? He says, well, Evander Holyfield. I said, both. And I was at my daughter, I can remember this Saturday very well. I was at my daughter's volleyball game, and someone called me on the phone. I picked up the phone, and the phone said, the champ will give you an hour if you can pick him up at the hotel in 10 minutes. And I said, I'll be there in 8. And I drove to the hotel. Evander Holyfield jumped into my car. And then then there's that trust, right? Because now I'm at the hotel. I didn't have any of my chemistry ready or anything. Didn't have any clean plates. I mean, it was a disaster, right? But here I got this opportunity, so I got to make the best of this. So on the way down, he's he's next to me in my car. So then I just start explaining to him why this is. And you can about imagine the photography studios that have Evander Holyfield, and you know what I mean? ESPN. I mean, you can about imagine. I mean, he's millions and millions and millions of professional photographs have been taken of this man. Over his life, and here he's never had his wet plate taken. So there's something about that uniqueness of it, and once you explain it, but I had to get that rapport, because that shot, the one that's at the Smithsonian, I knew I wanted his shirt off. And how do you tell the 5-time heavyweight champion of the world, oh, by the way, Evander, can you take your shirt off? You know what I mean? Like, how do you, so I had to gain that. I knew I wanted to get the raw pugilist, fists up, no shirt. It was that trust that I was able to, in that car ride, and then in my studio. And my studio at that time wasn't this natural light wet plate studio here in my backyard. It was a corner of a warehouse. So I'm taking Evander Holyfield into this corner of this warehouse, which he must have thought I was just crazy, right? I mean, there's all these light fixtures and bottles of chemicals. And I mean, it's just a warehouse that, just not think that anything coming out of. So, it goes back to the rapport, Raymond, and the trust. So, and so it's all been word of mouth. So all these people that Greta Thunberg, I got my 15 minutes. I heard that she's coming to Standing Rock. I was doing my Native American series, Northern Plains Native Americans: A Modern Wet Plate Perspective, which is a 20-year project of mine. And as soon as I heard that she was coming to Standing Rock, I knew I had my in. I made one phone call down to there, and the people of Standing Rock gave up 15 minutes of their time with Greta. They knew about my work and what I was doing for them for many years before that, right? I mean, Standing Rock people, I mean, many of them have come into my studio, and they said, "Oh, we'll give you 15 minutes with Greta," and that's when those opportunities knock, and then you just have to take them. So, but it's all been word of mouth, so there isn't some propaganda machine trying to get these celebrities to come find me. The people have come into my studio, found out who I am, and then they tell someone else, and that's it. That's how all my sitters have come in.
I guess. Do they have a sense by the time you start the exposure, by the time you remove that lens cap and you start that exposure, do you think that they have some sort of sense of the weight of what is about to happen?
Well, I'm not sure. And I can talk about the Greta situation because that was most recent. So when they came out, and I really said, can I only have 15 minutes with Greta, which is an insane, I should never say that. You know what I mean? Like, but if I said I need Greta for an hour, there's a good chance that I couldn't have gotten her, right? So I had to say, all I need is 15 minutes, which is a stupid thing to say. I mean, that's a stupid, I'm in the middle of a field down in Standing Rock with my cameras and chemistry in my dark room. and I don't even have a chance to take a test exposure, and I have to figure out it's F8 3 seconds on the dot to get that exposure. And it was just a gut check at that time. But they came to me and they said, well, we only have time for one photograph. And my heart sunk right away, because I had this idea of doing a documentary photograph, which is a close-up that I did of Greta, because I didn't want to get too creative. I wanted to make sure that you knew who she was. So I wanted to, in your face, I wanted to show this 16-year-old Greta Thunberg, Swedish environmentalist. I wanted to show who she was. And that would, for me, if I only had one chance to get a photograph, was going to be that close-up photograph of her. When the plate was coming in the fixture, I'm trying to answer your question, I poured the fixture onto the plate, and Greta was to my right, her father was to... Greta was to my left, her father was standing to my right, and I was on the ground with the bottle and the tray, and I poured the fixture on there, and that image came to life. And you can see that in the documentary. It was a collective whoa. Like, her dad and her just both said whoa at the same time. And I took that opportunity. I looked up at Savante, and they continue to, I got a text message from them 2 weeks ago, by the way. It's been 10 months since I spent time with them. I looked up to Savante and said, can I do another one? He said, absolutely. And that's when I got my chance for my second portrait, which is the most important portrait, which is the one that's at the Library of Congress, which is called Standing For Us All. And that's where I was able to, now I can get creative. Now I can get her in the environment. Now I can play a little bit with what I had to do. And so my 15 minutes turned into 20 minutes, and then she was in a car and she was gone. So if, Raymond, if I told you that Greta Thunberg, you would get 15 minutes with Greta Thunberg, and you grab your camera and your gear, you got your 15 minutes is next Tuesday, Greta Thunberg. But your camera has to be, the memory's got to be completely maxed out, and you only have 2 exposures. You only can take, you can't delete one exposure and get 3. You can't, you get 2 exposures. It's all you get. You get to snap the shutter, open the shutter, and close it twice. I mean, you would tell me that's insane.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, in modern photography world, that's absurd. Why would you handcuff me? You know what I mean? Like, why would I, Raymond? If I asked you to do that with your digital camera, or even a film camera, why would you, Shane, even a film camera, maybe it has 12 or 15 exposures. Oh, you can use one roll of film. Oh, wow, I got 15 exposures. I mean, that would be a godsend, right? I get to snap the shutter 15 times. I had 2 exposures.
And in that sense, what's the most important thing for you as far as, I take that back. The most important thing for you has to be the planning process, right? Ensuring that you have a vision of what it is that you want to capture before you actually get into that situation. Nothing that you're shooting at this point is reactionary, correct?
I always try to, even when sitters come in that I've never met before, I'm always trying to, I go out and I crawl their Facebook page or whatever. I try to find out who they are. I'm not looking at previous images of them, but I'm trying to understand who are they as a person, even before they come in. It's just I have to get a feel. And then I will find a piece of art or something, or another photograph that just kind of inspires me to say, this is kind of, because none of the people that come into my studio are professional models. These aren't professional models. And now they're not professionals, and I'm asking them to perform. And that's the other beautiful thing about this, and I describe it as a dance between the photographer and the sitter, because I can do the most beautiful wet plate work and photography work, which I don't, but I could. If I did, it doesn't matter if my sitter does not do what I need them to do, and which is hold still and to blink only once, and you know what I mean, like they hold a pose. I mean, so these people come in and you have to perform. When Greta Thunberg was in a 20-mile-per-hour wind in the open plains, and I did not have my head brace with. She had to stand there and hold still, and that was a 3-second exposure, f8. And 3 seconds, I mean, there's a lot of blurriness can happen in 3 seconds. And you know what I mean? Like, it's a pretty sharp image. It's a pretty sharp image. And I've heard people, there was one comment that I wish the image was sharper. It's like, you're not understanding what this is. You're not understanding what this photograph is if you're asking for more sharpness. If you were there next to me with a camera, with your camera, and I stood you and we got to get Greta's photograph. She's standing there, in the wind, and it's 3 seconds. I mean, you would say, well, God, that's going to be very difficult. And she had never done this before either. So there's that coaching that has to go. And that's building, while I'm coaching, I'm building the rapport, right? but it's a dance. They have to perform and I have to perform. And I think, some of that emotion that the sitters have towards the work that I do of them, I think that has to do with they recognize that, hey, I had to do something to get this photograph. You know what I mean? You come into my studio and you bring your camera and you start snapping shots. You can capture shots of me. I have no idea you're taking a photograph of me, and you can still get a good shot of me, right? I could be doing something. I mean, they know that there's some intent with the portrait, and with that intent comes these emotions. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
it does. Yeah, I see it. I mean, the way that I feel like you've kind of forged your path into photography is almost out of necessity, right? Because you don't really have any other option. You can't just use it as snapshots. You can't walk around, snap a photo here, snap a photo there. It's just not an option for you. So having to work within those constraints and make those constraints strengths is what it sounds like, is what exactly you've done to be able to capture the type of portraits that you have. And again, they're incredible. But going back to these long exposure times, I think maybe the listener might be a little bit confused as to why exposure times might be so long. So obviously in film days, you could just go buy a roll of 400, 800 ASA film. With digital, you can set your ISO to whatever you want for whatever the light sensitivity needs to be. For wet plate photography, what is the sensitivity? What's the speed, I guess, of a wet plate?
I don't know these terms. I mean, I know of these terms because I have photography friends. So ISO is the sensitivity, right? I think someone told me that it's negative.
Oh, what?
Negative. It's like -4 or something like that. And again, I'm no expert. I mean, I don't know what that. I understand. You're telling me ISO is sensitive, and I'm not being dumb here.
Right,
I'm being honest with you. Okay. I don't care. I mean, this is the only process that I follow. So I just know my process. So, but I want to say that a photographer wants, because I've been asked this question before. It's a negative ISO. So as far as sensitivity, and you can change your chemicals. You can mix. There's different recipes for different kinds of collodion that can make it more sensitive and less sensitive as well. But I don't know any of these terms I know what the term is. You can explain to me what they are, but I don't. It's not, Raymond. I'm not being naive for.
I guess let me. I totally understand it.
I have no interest. I don't
totally understand.
It doesn't apply to what I'm doing. It doesn't apply to what I'm doing.
Okay, so then let me rephrase the question.
It's almost like if I'm a painter and then you're a sculptor telling me something about sculpture. I don't really feel that I'm a photographer, Raymond. I'm more an image maker. I'm not really, and it took me 5 years to even call myself a photographer. And not because I'm better than photographers, but I just didn't want to insult real photographers, because I know there's people like yourself that know all these other technical things. And I'm not about technical at all. I'm about hands-on, shooting from the hip, gut check, get the image at all costs, doesn't matter. How I got the image, and I tell the students this, I don't care how you get the image. Nobody cares what lens Ansel Adams used. Nobody even cares what process Ansel Adams used, do they? I mean, there's some professor may, but you don't care how Ansel Adams, I'm just using him for an example, how he got to his images. Who gives a shit? It doesn't matter. Did he get to his image? That's all that matters. So if you have to stand on your hands, do 4 jumping jacks before the exposure, do a cartwheel, I don't care what you have to do. As long as you get to the image, that's all that matters. So everything up to that point is irrelevant.
So, and I totally get that, and I love that state that you're in, almost this totally ignorant state of photography, right? Because I remember when I was, as all beginners, we get so excited about these new things that happen for us that it seems like we're taking such big leaps and bounds forward, even though there in the beginning, we don't know all the technical aspects. And it sounds like the sensitivity wasn't even an issue back in the day, because we all had the same amount of light, I suppose. So let me rephrase that question, which is, does do you find that that the exposure times are pretty consistent in consistent light, or do they vary depending on how long the plate is in the I'm sorry, the silver nitrate, I believe it was. Is that what you said? Silver nitrate?
Yeah, it has nothing to do with that. It there was a struggle when I built my natural light studio, because in my old studio where I took Evander Holyfield, I had these 3 big, huge fixtures that had these daylight bulbs. So for growing plants, because this process loves natural light. It loves UV light. Okay, the infrared doesn't register. Okay, so a red shirt. If I had a red shirt on and you take my wet plate, it's a black shirt. If I have a blue shirt on, it's a white shirt. In wet plate process, it's just how the colors translate. So this process loves ultraviolet, and it infrared, it doesn't really register. So the sensitivity at my old studio, when I turned the lights on, I always got what I got, because if I always had all the fixtures on, I always got the same exposure, right? It was very, very similar. But now I have my natural light studio, so a cloud may come over, or maybe overcast that day, or it may be a bright sunny day. So there's an adjustment that I have to make every given day, every given plate. So I will go in and I'll compose a shot, and I'll have in my mind, okay, that's a 9-second exposure. Just because I made so many of these, I'm in the light, just the light. I don't use a meter. I just know that this is a 9-second exposure. The amount of light off my subject's face right now is 9 seconds. Now I go back in the dark room, I pour the plate, come back out 3 minutes later, and a cloud moves over, and now I'm setting them at 11 seconds. But it's all hit or miss. It's all shooting. But the point is I shoot. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to shoot at that 10 second. Oh, well, it wasn't right. You know what I mean? But the point is to take the shot. And the other thing I want to kind of explain to maybe your listeners, and this is, your podcast about beginning photography, is I don't want to preach, okay? But I've got to say this, okay? Chasing gear, okay? Chasing the newest lens, chasing the newest camera, chasing the newest flash, chasing the newest, whatever it may be. It's not, for me, it's not where it would be at. Okay, because I've seen some beautiful images, pinhole images, where the camera doesn't even have a lens. And it goes back to my idea, it's all about the final image. So these guys that change their lenses like underwear, okay, I worry more about the image, and I only use Carl Zeiss Tessar lenses. It's the only lenses that I have. I've got 150-year-old lenses on the shelves here. I never mount them on my camera. I never create with them, because I feel like if I create with the same tool, the same lens, the same era lens, that I'm going to eventually get better at it. Like it's like when I was a golfer, I used the same putter for 15 years. Okay, I didn't change my equipment. I thought that even though this may be an insuperior technologically putter, there's newer putters made out of better materials and stuff like that out on the market, which I could have upgraded to them. But you know what, my 15-year-old putter, I've been putting with it. It's got my marks. You can see, you know what I mean? You can see all the, there's a usefulness. There's a comfort level that I have with that particular instrument, that I like that. And that's why I think when you see my work, you can see, oh, that's a Balkowitsch. Like, if you see one of my Native American works and you see another one, you quickly see that, if I change lenses, I may change my whole aesthetic, and I don't want to change lenses. I'm a simpleton. If there was ever such a thing as a one-trick pony, I am a one-trick pony to the grave. I mean, I am a one-trick pony. This is all I do. I don't care about anything else. So, it's not that I mean to be naive and stuff. And I have photographers that come in, and early on when photographers started flocking to my studio, they quickly, and I've been told this more than once, Shane, don't grab a book. Don't listen to someone else's opinion. Don't do those things. Do what you're doing, because somehow you're just stumbling, you're finding your own way, and it works for you. And their thought, and what they shared with me, is that they thought that someone would have some kind of influence on me, and then maybe that, my aesthetic or my work would change. And I'm always willing to change and look at different things, but there's something about this way that I kind of block out. And I take advice when photographers, one of the things that I learn all the time is the photographers, and I've had photographers that have been in my studio. I had one that was 55-year photographer. He's been practicing photography for 55 years. He was in here last week. He drove in from out of state. I gained something from him. You know what I mean? Like I want to learn something from him. But it's not about how he does it. It's about what I can take from him, the way that he does his stuff, and how I can apply it to where I'm trying to go with mine.
And make it your own, obviously. And I think, again, that's what's so unique about just seeing something new with fresh eyes. And I think one of the reasons why you've had such great success in capturing these really unique images, on top of the technique that it takes, not the technique, the process in which it takes to capture the images that you do. Coming at it with such fresh eyes is such a skill and a benefit, and I think that's why so many other photographers have told you, like, don't listen to anybody else, don't read into anything else. But again, I think that you're doing it the right way. I love it. When you, I'm always interested to know from a photographer, because I consider you a photographer. You are capturing images, using a camera to capture images. I consider you a photographer. I don't think that has anything to do so much with the technical abilities. It's being able to capture an image. So to me, you're a photographer. So my question is, what do you think are some of the unique challenges that you face outside of the process of capturing a photo? What are some of the unique challenges that you face compared to modern photographers?
Well, I mean, if the real big challenge, and I alluded to it a little bit earlier, is taking this on the road. Like, people think, they'll say, well, can you just come here and take pictures? And it's not like that. I have to actually have, I mean, can you about imagine how many iPhone photographs would be taken today? And I don't know if your listeners know this, but we've taken more digital photographs today in 24-hour period than we have in the first 150 years of photography. Mm-hmm. But if to take an iPhone photograph, if you had to have a darkroom with you and you had to actually develop and fix your iPhone photograph within 5 minutes of taking it, iPhone photographs would be taking. So there's the difficulty of taking this on the road is one of the things that, and anytime you go on the road and you're in a different environment and stuff, it's just not, people just think that you're just grabbing my camera, and even they think it's my big box camera. So they think, oh, I can just throw that over my shoulder. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just like it's my iPhone. Like, it's just a little bit bigger, but it acts the same way. It's not like that at all. I mean, I have to actually make my film out of glass and silver nitrate. I mean, in the field, I have an entire portable darkroom with all the trays, and I have to have ample amounts of water, and the fixer's got to be there, developer's got to be there, the silver nitrate's got to be there. I got to have glass, and it all has to be there to make an image. And you just don't have that today. You can just put it in your back pocket. When you get to your destination, pull it out. And I mean, we don't even use tripods anymore. I mean, these are things that I think about, like tripods, for the love of God. I mean, I don't know the last time I saw, you don't need them with modern cameras. Tripods, there's a purpose for those, right? I mean, but we don't even need them. Our exposure times are so quick, and cameras have gotten so efficient that we don't even need tripods. I mean, my tripod here weighs 600 pounds and is 14 feet tall in my studio. So, these are just things, but people don't think about that. They don't think about where we've come. You know what I mean? People think, like the flash photography in the old Westerns where they did the magnesium, where they would like the powdered magnesium, the old Western, they take a picture of the dead guy in the casket or whatever. There's always that depiction of old Western flash. Well, people don't understand that that's 1906. My process is 50 years before that. So people think that that's old time photography when magnesium shooters, the magnesium flash, that was like state of the art, top of the line. I mean, you were actually able to maybe even take a picture at dusk. I mean, there was no photographs in the Victorian era that were taken at night. I mean, there was only one source there wasn't flash. There was one source of light. It was the sun. So at 9 o'clock, if Sitting Bull came into your house, you're not taking Sitting Bull's photograph because it's at 9 o'clock at night and you have no sun. People, you know what I mean? But we're so used to we're so used to flash, we're so used to all the modern conveniences of photography. We don't think about, I've got a head brace that clamps these people's heads into position so that they don't move their face.
Yeah, that's something that I've never had to look for on Amazon. I got to tell you that. So
If you find one, now, if you find one at a garage sale, buy it for me, because the last one that I want to say I saw sold for like $6,000.
These aren't something that you can manufacture? You couldn't make something like this?
Well, mine was not, mine is a remanufactured one. A friend of mine, a wet plate brother of mine, had an original, and he took it to a foundry, had a cast made, and he was making these before he passed away about a year and a half ago. So yeah, they don't, and you can come up with a modern solution for it, but to have an actual Victorian head brace, if you had an original, the price is probably $6,000 to $10,000 for an original if it was in good condition. And all it is a metal on, a stand.
I gotta say, Shane, this is a lot of work. This is a lot of work. Today we have cameras that, as you said, they're lighter, they're faster, they have better dynamic range. When you started wet plate, surely you thought to yourself, I like this, but maybe I might pick up one of these new current cameras to see if I like that as well. Did that thought ever cross your mind?
Never. I have a Polaroid here someone sent me a Polaroid. I have film cameras just for on display, because I try, when the students come in, I try to show them like the history of cameras and stuff like that, and try to show them some of the old Brownings and stuff like that. I have them they're on display. They're just sitting here on the shelf. I never load them with film. I have no interest. I have no interest in any, and that's to be said if I could not practice wet plate tomorrow for whatever reason. I just could not. I would stop making images. I would not convert. I have no interest. And I know that, that sounds stupid, but it's just where I'm at. It's just where I'm at, and it has to be where I'm at.
I don't know if it sounds stupid. I wouldn't say that it sounds stupid, but it definitely may sound foreign. What is overall, I want you to tell me about this current project, which you talked about earlier, the Northern Plains, photographing Native Americans, right? Why you think the wet plate process is probably the best medium to capture these incredible images?
Well, because this was the process that was the first time that we saw photographs of Native Americans. Remember, we're all in the eastern part of the country, and as we started moving west, the photographs from the frontier, these wet plate photographers would be out there on the frontier, and they'd be capturing and sending these photographs of Native Americans and other subjects back to the city, and it was that these are the first images. So it's not, you can go to Deadwood, South Dakota, and then you can go into the little booth, and we all know these booths where it used to be a film camera, but now it's a digital camera where they put a sepia tone filter or something on it, and they're trying to pretend they dress you up in a cowboy hat, and they sit you in a little booth and hand you a rifle, and they try to make, what are they trying to do? They're trying to fool you into thinking that they're making a wet plate. I'm not fooling anyone. I'm actually doing the exact process that these people are trying. And I've had a photographer from Medora came into my studio, and he's been doing this for 30 years. He's been mocking, not mocking in a bad way, great gentleman. Nothing wrong with this. I'm just saying he's been faking the process with either film or digital cameras for 30 years at Medora. And he came in and he was just like blown away. It was his watershed moment for him. Obviously he knew about the wet plate process, had never seen it in person. And he comes in, and I took his wet plate, and there was this very strange thing that happened with him that he really got to see for the first time what he's been faking the entire time. So the first photographs, the first ever photograph of Sitting Bull. The first ever photograph of Sitting Bull. Do you mind if I get up from the speaker for 1 second?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead. Yeah.
So the first ever photograph, and this is only for the people that aren't listening, but this here, if you look, you'll know this photograph if you know anything about Sitting Bull. This photograph is the first ever photograph of Sitting Bull ever captured. Guess where it was captured at?
Where's that?
Bismarck, North Dakota.
Where you are.
By this gentleman here, Orlando Scott Goff. So the first ever photograph of Sitting Bull was captured in my hometown of Bismarck, North Dakota. He had his studio on the 3rd floor of the Blockhouse building. That's drive by. When I come home every day, I drive by Orlando Scott Goff's studio, where he worked out of, where he captured the first ever photograph of Sitting Bull. And to talk about my Native American series, Northern Plains Native Americans, a modern wet plate perspective, do you know who my first Native American I ever captured was?
I do, because I've seen the documentary, but go ahead and let the listeners know.
So for the listeners, this is my photograph of Ernie Lapointe, the great-grandson of Sitting Bull. So in the same city, in the same process, I captured Sitting Bull's great-grandson 135 years after Orlando Scott Goff did in the same city. And that one portrait kind of just blew things up for me. There was a realization. Before that, I was going over to Fort Abraham Lincoln. There were some reenactors over there. You know what I mean? Like these reenactors and stuff, they kind of are attracted to these wet plate photographers, modern day ones. And I have a lot of brothers and sisters that practice wet photography, and they take portraits of reenactors. But as soon as I captured Ernie Lapointe, it occurred to me that there's real history. You know what I mean? Like I don't have to pretend that these people are from the Victorian era. And even though I do sometimes, but we're not pretending. These photos of my Native Americans, these are my friends that come in, and they're in their regalia. They know that they're going to have a formal portrait taken. And what do? They wear their best clothes, their regalia. These are very important religious clothing to them. And so if you shoot a Native American in a historic process, it gives you exactly what you want to see. For me, I mean, it just seems natural, and you can, I think you can see that. There was I got an email about 2 years ago. It was from Google. And someone at Google, there was one of my wet plates was attributed to me, and I don't know if it was in an article or if it was on a site or where it was, but I got this message, and it said, we wanted to let you know that you couldn't possibly be the creator of this because you're attributing your photo. This is your photograph, and this is an historic photograph. And it was one of my wet plates that I took. So they were accusing me of pretending that this historic photograph that I took of a Native American was a historic photograph, and I could not possibly be the photographer. So I quickly responded to the email, sent the images of me having my arm around my sitter, a picture, taking the picture, and I sent it over to them, and they wrote me an apology letter back saying we didn't realize that that was your image and that's a modern day image. So I don't know.
Wow. Well, that's a great story, by the way. I'm sure that whoever sent that email just had to eat crow for lunch that day.
I'm trying to remember, and it was just kind of in passing, and I wish I would have saved it or something, so I really kind of understood the context of it. But the image was out there and it was being used. I don't know if maybe it was being used on Wikipedia or something like that. My image was being used. It was attributed to me. They knew that I was alive and well. They could send me an email, right? And they knew that the image was an historic image. It couldn't possibly have been made in present day. They knew it was a wet plate. That probably further got them thinking that this could not have been, in the modern day, right? And they kicked off this letter to me accusing me of not that being. I was taking someone's historic photograph and claiming it to be my own.
Like, joke's on you. Here's the iPhone photo selfie that I got with my sitter here. So funny. I want to know a little bit more about the project that you're doing. What is the message overall that you're trying to share? What is the power that your photographs give to the Native Americans that you're photographing?
Well, I didn't know that. Again, this is all not planned. You know what I mean? There was not some great. I took the wet plate of Ernie Lapointe, and it wasn't, the series didn't start immediately. It took me some time, but the image got so much notoriety, and so many people just really liked it. I just asked. Dakota Goodhouse was my second person that I took, and he came in, and he's a professor at United Tribes, and he came in, and I sat and I shared his photograph. So it was this building kind of thing. For me, I know the atrocities of what happened to the Native Americans. That the number, about 75 million Native Americans have been killed since Columbus landed. And I wanted to prove that they're still here, that they're still here in spirit. They're still here. They still have their language. They still have their culture. They still have their religion. They're still here. And one of the hugest honor, I'm going to say it, it's the largest honor that I've ever received in my life. Calvin Grinnell, the MHA Nation elder, came into my studio. He called me on the phone one day. I'd been in the process for about 2 years, and he'd been in my studio a couple of times and knew who I was. And he called me on the phone and says, "I have your name." And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "I have your name." And I said, "I don't know what are you talking about?" And he says, "I have your Native American name." He says, "I'd like to have a formal ceremony in your studio in 2 weeks' time with witnesses and food and the whole 9 yards, and give you the name Shekatcher, which is Meishte Ekagoche." So I am Hidatsa. I've been adopted into the Hidatsa tribe as Shadow Catcher. And this series has always had really importance in my life. And I was really, it's always been, if you ask me what is my main work, like my main goal for my webplate work, once I started capturing Native Americans, was capturing Native Americans. And, but when I got that name, something just changed. Like I was now, and it's going to take me 20 years. I'm almost 7 years into this so far. And I've captured 402 Native Americans so far in the process. Every plate goes to the Historical Society of North Dakota in their vault. And my goal is 1,000. So it'll take me another 12 years or so to get to 1,000 web plates of Native Americans. So, but I was always dedicated to this. My life's work is my Native American work. But when I got that name and they bestowed upon me the name, these people are no longer just strangers coming in. They're my brothers and sisters. And it's, I have a hard time articulating what that means. The trust that I have been given by the Native American tribes. And so I just don't want to let them down.
Yeah, and I gotta say, we haven't really talked much about the documentary, but the documentary that featured you, this wet plate process, and also photographing Native Americans. I mean, just what's really interesting is that obviously there's some cultural hesitance to getting a photograph taken of a Native American, right? For them to have a photograph taken, but to see the perception almost turn around because of the seriousness that you take in the photographs and the preservation efforts that you have in order to continue on with their history, their lineage, is really, I mean, an incredible thing to be able to work on. And I think that it's something that many photographers would just jump at the chance if they had something like that. So for those who are, now I know that you said that was never your intent when you started shooting wet plate, but it evolved into that, right? For those who are just getting into photography, what would you say to them about maybe following something that could potentially turn into a lifelong project?
Just be open. Just be open. Be honest with yourself, and you can't. I don't think you can it wasn't like I was searching for it. It just kind of like fell in my lap. But when it did fall in my lap, right, I was aware, and then you just have to dedicate yourself to it. I think that's the real thing. I mean, you really just have to say, "I'm going to do this. This inspires me. I think that I can make a difference in the world or in life or in an entire people's lives." And then just chase it and just kind of go for it. But if you just, I'm always shooting, I'm always going for the shot. I don't talk much about it. That's to say, and if I do talk about it, it's happening. Like I'm not much of a talker. If I talk about it, it's going to happen because I just have to will it. Some of these images just like haunt me. I have them in my head. I don't know how to get them onto glass, but they haunt me. I just chase them until I get them, and then I can move on to the next image. So if something, you have to be open for it. You can't be looking too hard for it, but you just have to be open to things. And then if you act out of kindness and generosity, how can you go wrong? I mean, there's not some magic, some magic formula that I have here. There's nothing magical about what I'm doing. I just try to be genuine and kind and thoughtful, and I share that with the world, and it'll come back on you. So I never do anything to get something back. Like, for instance, having my own Native American name. I never anticipated that. I never thought, oh, if I do this, I'll get that, or, you know what I mean? Like, you just throw these good things, throw these good intentions, just throw them out in the world. Just keep throwing them. You may not get nothing back at first. Trust me, you throw enough good intentions out in the world, something's going to come back. You just never know what that is. And like with this documentary, it wasn't my plan to do a documentary. I mean, these two young filmmakers, this is their first documentary. They followed me around for a year and a half with zero budget. They had no money. I never got paid. I never paid them. They don't pay, even on the sale of the video right now, I don't get any money from it. It's not about that. It's about these two artists wanted to feature me. And it's so you throw things out in the world and you'd be surprised at what comes back.
It's funny that you said that you don't have a magic process, as many people would say the web plate is literally a magic process as I guess you're developing it. And I would say that your sitters probably would say the exact opposite, that it's pretty a magical process. Having never seen one done myself, I can only imagine. And one day I look forward to coming out to Bismarck, North Dakota, and possibly seeing you put this together, and after you put out your manual, come into the master's den and see how it's done. So I really look forward to that. Shane, you've been so gracious with your time today. This has been more than an hour. We're at an hour and a half right now. I don't want to take up any more of your time. So for the listeners who maybe they were driving in their car, they have no idea what a wet plate even looks like. They can't even fathom the difference between it and a traditional photograph. Where can listeners find you online, learn more about you, and see some of your images?
Yeah, so on Google, there's just got to find my website, and it's this archaic website name. So I'm just gonna, if you type in Balkowitsch, Balkowitsch, that's my last name, wet plate on Google, you will find multiple articles, the Wikipedia page, and there's a TEDx talk that I've done. And so if people are interested, also the documentary can be found on Amazon, so Amazon Prime right now. You can watch the documentary. Again, it's called Balkowitsch, my last name. And if you're if you're in the United States, you can get it on Amazon. And if you're out of the country in Canada or Europe or somewhere else, you can go to Vimeo.com and search for the documentary Balkowitsch. And it was such a magical process to just to be involved with and to let them just do what they wanted to do. I had no input into this documentary at all. Out of the goodness of their heart, they decided they wanted to do this, and I was, again, goes back to what I said earlier, just be open to it, right? I mean, I knew there was going to be some of my time was going to be involved, and I'd have to, make allotments for all this video camera work and stuff like that. But it was like, just do it, make yourself available, throw it out there, let these people, let these kind artists do what they think they want to do, and just trust them. And again, it goes back to that trust. And I think as photographers, if your listeners are shooting portraits, it's all about that rapport, it's all about the trust. If you gain that trust, the image is going to come. It's going to come at some point. And it's what I've always worked at, is trying to gain the trust, and the images will follow.
What did I tell you at the beginning of this thing? This is not an easy process for just taking an image, but what I loved is just that the way that Shane kind of looks at photography as a whole is it's not just he's taking an image, it's that he's creating something. And not only is he creating something, he's creating something out of life, and he's capturing that forever. And what's different, obviously, is that, you could say that about any camera, but I really think that Shane feels the weight of that, of all of that together, right? And it goes into all of the photos that that he takes, which is so awesome. I think that my biggest takeaway, though, from this interview here with Shane was just that you really never know when inspiration is going to strike. And I know that may sound corny, but, you know, when something, you know, sticks for you, then it just does. And you need to be open and aware of this potentially happening, and then just go all in, you know, just go all in on it. If something feels important to you, don't brush it off and, you know, say like, oh, the process is too old or it's too expensive or anything like that. Just go for it. Give it some time. Let this idea mature and see where it takes you. And also, my second biggest takeaway was just simply, you know, don't take the ability to take more than one photo in a 20-minute time period for granted, because it's rough. That is rough. Definitely high stakes. So if you were fascinated, as I was, to learn about the entire process, earlier in the intro, I did mention the documentary featuring Shane, and I said that I want to pay for your rental. So there's a link to the doc in the show notes of this episode. And for the first 10 people to rent it, just send me a receipt to beginnerphotographypodcast@gmail.com, and I'll just PayPal you right back your rental charge. It's that easy. Again, really fascinating look as far as what goes into all of this. And for Shane, you know, what still goes into making photographs. And I think that it will help you just further appreciate the art form that is photography just that much more. And honestly, sometimes it just takes that 1 or 2 degrees that's really going to set you off in your own unique path. So I hope that you take me up on that offer. Again, if you rent it, screenshot the receipt or forward me the email, whatever it is, to beginnerphotographypodcast@gmail.com. First 10 people, I'm going to just PayPal you back that money. So that is it for this week. Until next week, I want you to make do. I want you to make more. I want you to do more. And I want you to make do with what you got, because I promise you, it is better than you think. Stay safe.
Thank you for listening to the Beginner Photography Podcast. If you enjoy the show, consider leaving a review in iTunes. Keep shooting, and we'll see you next week.